All right, so today we're going to be doing slope, finding slope between 2 points. We're going to start off with the notes, a couple practice questions, and then we're going to get into the classwork a little bit later. So slope is going to be a topic that's going to lead us into linear equations and graphing lines. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the definition of slope is just going to be a number that measures the steepness of a line. So slope is going to measure the steepness of a line. If you guys need pencils, I got some up here. Okay, so every single line is going to have a slope to it, except for vertical lines. Those have no slope whatsoever. But even horizontal lines, those have slope, even though it has a slope of 0. So let's talk a little bit more about this definition. So the slope of a line is going to be the ratio. Ratio is just a word that means fraction. It's going to be the ratio of the change in the y coordinates we're going to put the y coordinates on top of the fraction. To the change in the x coordinates. To the change in the x coordinates. So the x coordinates are actually going to go on the bottom of the fraction, also known as the denominator. So that's the definition of slope. Now, there are a couple ways that you can find slope. Today, we're going to be using 2 ordered pairs to find slope. So the formula for that is going to be slope and we're going to use a lowercase m for slope. So when we find slope, we're going to have the change in y on the top of the fraction. So on the top of the fraction, I'm going to write change in y. And then on the bottom of the fraction, we're going to have the change in x. So y always goes on top, and x always goes on the bottom. So that's going to be the basic formula for slope. Another way you can write this is delta y divided by delta x. And this is going to be the Greek letter delta. It's going to stand for change. So literally it means change in y over change in x. So you probably also heard slope as described as rise over run. Have any of you heard that before?
Yes.
Okay. So the rise is going to go on top of the fraction. And then the run is going to go on the bottom of the fraction. So when we talk about rise, we're talking about how far up or down you're going. That's going to be the y-axis. So that's why it goes on top. And then the run is going to be how far to the right you go or how far to the left you go. And that's going to be on the x-axis. And that's always going to be at the bottom of the fraction. So we can write it this way. Another way we can write it is y2 minus y1 on top And then on the bottom of the fraction, we're going to have x2 minus x1. So we're always putting those y values on top and the x values on the bottom. This is only if you have two ordered pairs, x1, y1, and x2, y2. Now, the cool thing about this formula is the 2's always come first, but you can actually write it this way with the 1's coming first, and you'll get the same answer. So I can also put the 1's first. So you can have the 2's coming first. That's probably the way that you learned it. But you can also have the 1's coming first, and you'll actually get the same answer either way you do it.
So why do they teach us that on the first time?
I think it's because the x values, they want to introduce some kind of order to it, and it would be easier to remind kids that order is required if you actually wrote the 2 first instead of the 1. But I'll show you in one of the examples how this formula actually works too. So that's going to be the slope formula that we're going to be using. Either one of those is fine. Okay, let's talk about the different types of slope that you could get. So there are 4 types of slope. There's the positive, the negative, 0, and undefined. So if your slope is positive, what's going to happen is your line is going to go up as you go from left to right. The line goes up. Then the negative slope is going to be the opposite. You're going to be going downwards like this. So that's the difference between positive and negative. When you have positive, you're going up from left to right, and then negative means you're going down from left to right. There are 2 more types that we need to talk about. There is the 0 slope, which is where your line is completely flat. There is no slope whatsoever to this line. And when you graph these, you're going to get horizontal lines. Horizontal lines. Now, if you ever want to graph a horizontal line and you're using a calculator to do it, the equation is always going to be y equals c, where c is some number, but y is a variable. So then there's one more type of slope, undefined. So this is where you actually have a vertical line. So you're going to have this vertical line going straight up and down. So I'm going to write vertical lines. And if you ever want to graph a vertical line, let's say you're on Desmos or you're doing some graphing calculator kind of thing, the equation is going to be x equals c, where x is a variable and c is just going to be a number. So those are the 4 different types of slope. I did want to talk about 0 and undefined a little bit more. So what does undefined mean? That's when you're dividing by what? You're dividing by 0, right? So if I had 3 divided by 0, I can't divide by 0, so we say that this is undefined. But if it was the other way around and we had 0 on top, that would be a little bit different. Because 0 divided by 3 would be what? 0. Yep. So that's the difference between having a 0 slope and having an undefined slope. And that undefined means you're actually dividing by 0. And we'll take a look at that in a minute. So those are the 4 different types of slope. You're always going to be choosing from one of these 4. Okay. So on the next slide, what we're going to do is we're going to do the first 4 examples in the notes, and then I'll show you how to do a few of the problems on the classwork. Now, for every single one of these questions, we're going to be using this formula right here. M equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So the first question gives us -5 comma 3. That's going to be my first ordered pair. Notice that the x value always comes first. And then the y value is always going to come second. So then the next point that they give us is 2 comma 1, where the 2 is the x value and the 1 is the y value. So now let's put numbers on these variables. So the first ordered pair we have, we're going to put 1s on the x's and the y's. So I'm going to have x1 and y1. And the 1 just means that's the first ordered pair that you see. The second ordered pair is going to have 2's on them. So you're going to have x2 and y2. So now that you know what all the variables mean, we're going to plug all these numbers into this formula up here. So we're going to do the y values on top. y2, that is this 1 right here. And then I'm going to put the subtraction sign in the middle. And then y1 is going to be this 3 right here. So I have 1 minus 3 on top. On the bottom, that's where I'm going to put the x values. My x2 is this positive 2 right here. I bring down my subtraction sign. And then x1 is a -5. So I'm going to put the -5 in parentheses. I'm actually going to have a double negative at the bottom. So now doing the top of the fraction first, 1 minus 3 is going to give me what? 1 minus 3 is -2. On the bottom, I have 2 minus -5. That's the same thing as 2 plus 5, which would be what? 2 plus 5? Yeah, 7. So the 7 is going to go on the bottom. Now, since I have -2 over 7, I can't really simplify the fraction down anymore. So I have to leave this as my answer. I can't make it any simpler. It's already in simplest form. And since this is a negative slope, I'm going to have a line that slopes downward like this. Okay, let's take a look at the second one we're going to do. The second one is 4 comma 3 and 1 negative 1. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to label my x values and my y values. The x always comes first and the y always comes second. So xy, xy. My first ordered pair is going to be 4 comma 3. So these are going to get 1s. But these are going to get 2s, since this is my second ordered pair. So now that I know what all the variables are, I can just plug in the numbers into my formula. So we're going to do y2 minus y1 on top. That's going to be negative 1 minus 3. And then in the denominator, I'm going to have the x values. That's going to be 1 minus 4. So then on the top of the fraction, I have negative 1 minus 3. That's negative 4. In the bottom of the fraction, I have 1 minus 4. That's going to be negative 3. So now I have negative 4 divided by negative 3. I can't really simplify the two numbers down anymore since it's 4 over 3. But the two negatives are going to cancel each other out. So I'm actually going to have a positive 4/3. So let me write that down over here. 4 over 3. That's my answer. Notice this is a positive number. So when I draw my line, it's going to have a positive slope to it. That means it's going to go up as you go from left to right. So that's what the line would look like. Okay, so on the next slide, we're going to do number 3 and number 4. And you'll get a first-hand look at what undefined means and what a zero slope would look like. So let's head on to the next slide. And once again, my formula is up here. Okay, so number 3 says 2 comma 5. And then 2 negative 6. Notice that the x values match up for this one. That's important. This is going to be my x value, and the 5 is going to be my y value. So xy, xy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 1s for the first point, and then 2 for the second point. Okay, so I'm going to do the y values on top, subtract those, and then I'm going to divide it by the x values at the bottom. So I'm going to get negative 6 minus 5. And I'm going to divide it by 2 minus 2. So on the top of the fraction, I'm going to get negative 6 minus 5. That's negative 11. But at the bottom of the fraction, I have 2 minus 2. And that's going to be what?
0.
0. Yep. So I'm dividing by 0 for this one. That means that the slope is going to be undefined, since I can't divide by 0 and get a real number. And if you do this in your calculator, you try to divide by 0 in there, it'll tell you error. And since the slope is undefined, I don't really have a slope for my line. So that means it's going to be a vertical line. Okay, let's try number 4. I've got -6/8 and 4/8. This time, the y values are going to match up. That's important. So for my first ordered pair, my x value is -6. My y value is going to be 8. And then over here, my x value is going to be 4, and my y value is going to be 8. And I'll put 1s here, and I'll put 2s over here. Okay, so let's use the formula up there. I'm going to subtract the y values on top. That's going to give me 8 minus 8. And I'm sure you know what that is. At the bottom of the fraction, I'm going to have 4 minus a -6. Notice that double negative comes into play because I'm taking this 4 and subtracting the -6. So on top of the fraction, I'm going to have 8 minus 8, which is 0. But then on the bottom of the fraction, that double negative makes it a positive. So it's actually 4 plus 6. That's going to give me 10. So now that I have 0 divided by 10, I know that that's going to be 0. So my slope is going to be 0 for this one. That means my line is completely flat. It's going to be a horizontal line. So if you think about it, on a horizontal line, the y values are always the same. So it's no surprise that 8 is going to be equal to 8. And if you look at a vertical line like this one right here, the x values are always going to be the same. And that's why 2 is going to be equal to 2 right here. Okay? So what I wanted to do now is I wanted to show you that the other formula actually works. So let me erase this line and we'll do y1 minus y2 at the top. So if I was to do the first y value minus the second y value, I would still get 8 minus 8. That doesn't change. But then in the denominator, I'm going to have -6 minus 4. Eight minus 8 is still going to give me 0. But at the bottom of the fraction, what's -6 minus 4 going to give me? It's actually going to be a negative, right? -10. But notice I've still got 0 at the top, which means my answer is still going to be 0. So the second formula does work.
So does it work only for the 0 slope, or it can actually work every single one?
Every single question. And I'll show you why. So if you have y2 minus y1 on top, and you have x2 minus x1 on the bottom, what you could do is you could switch the order, but that would require taking out a -1. So I take out a -1, the order is going to flip. And then I can take out a -1 at the bottom, and that order is also going to flip. I'll get x1 minus x2. So now notice how you have a -1 on top and a -1 at the bottom. If I was to divide -1 by -1, I would get a +1. So these actually cancel out, leaving me with a y1 minus y2 on top and an x1 minus x2 at the bottom. So those two formulas are the exact same thing. Okay, let's get to the classwork. We're going to do this on a separate sheet of paper. So if you need another sheet, I've got some up here for you to get. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the 10 questions that are on the classwork. And I think I'm going to do the first 2 with you. And then the rest of them you can do on your own. Okay, classwork. So for the first one, it's going to give you 18,7 and 7, -4. And we're still using the y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So I'm going to underline the y values, the -4 and the 7. I'm going to subtract those on top. And then the x values, I'm going to circle those. So the 7 and the 18. I'm going to do that on the bottom. So now on the top, I have -4 minus 7. That's going to give me -11. If you're having trouble with that, you can use a calculator. I've got 7 minus 18 at the bottom. That's also going to give me -11. So now I can divide the two numbers and I get +1. And then I circle that. That's going to be my answer. So because this line has a positive slope, it's going to be going up as you go from left to right. Okay, let's do the second one. I've got 20, -10, and I've got 8, -12. So once again, I'm going to underline my y values. So the -12 and the -10. If I subtract the -10, I know that I'm going to have a double negative somewhere in there. So I put the -10 inside parentheses. In the bottom of the fraction, that's where I put the x values. I'm going to have 8 minus 20. That's going to give me a negative number. Okay, so on the top of the fraction, I have -12 minus a -10. That's a double negative, so it's actually a plus. I'm going to get -2 on the top. In the bottom, I have 8 minus 20. That's going to give me -12. Since I have a negative on the top and I have a negative on the bottom, if I divide negative by negative, I'm going to get a positive answer. So I can cancel out the two negatives, but there's one more thing that I can do with my answer.
Divide by 2.
Yeah, I can divide by 2 on the top and the bottom. So yeah, I'm going to get 1 on top, but what am I going to get at the bottom? A 6. Yep. So my answer is 1/6. So even though it's a fraction for my answer, it is in simplest form, and that's what I'll be looking for on the classwork. I'll be looking to see, once you get your answer, did you put it in simplest form that you possibly can? 1/6 is a positive fraction, so your line is going to go up as you go from left to right. It's going to do it at a slower pace, though, since it's 1/6. So it'll look more like this. It'll have a nice gentle slope compared to the first one because 1/6 is less than 1, if that makes any sense to you. All right, so let's do 3 next, and then I'll let you do 4 through 10 on your own. So let's take a look at 3. So I've got -10, 0, and -12, 11. I'm going to underline the y values. This 11 right here is a y value, and this 0 right here. So I'm going to have 11 minus 0 on top. Then I'm going to circle the x values. So the -12 minus -10. There's that double negative again. So I'm going to put that in parentheses. So the top of the fraction is pretty easy. 11 minus 0 is just 11.
It's an improper fraction.
Yeah. It'll be an improper fraction. Right. And then on the bottom of the fraction, I'm going to have -12 plus 10. That's because of that double negative right there.
-2.
Yeah, that'll be -2. And since I can't really divide 11 by -2, I'm going to leave that in this form right here. So this is a negative fraction. That means the slope of your line is negative. That means it's going to fall as it goes from left to right. So it's going to look like this. Okay. Go ahead and try number 4 through 10. And when you get done, make sure your name is on it and put it in the box before you leave. Are there any more questions that you guys have? Okay,
You want
good.
to put both of them in there, the notes and all?
Yeah. Okay, people out there on Zoom land, if you have any questions, go ahead and throw them down in the chat box. I will get to you as soon as I can. But that's all I got for today, so class dismissed.